What happens when the most powerful air force on the planet stops bombing mid-campaign? And the reason isn't mercy, isn't victory, isn't diplomacy, but arithmetic. For 13 nights, American strike packages hammered Iranian territory. Then, on a Friday, the flight lines went quiet. No press conference, no Oval Office address, just silence. That silence is not the sound of a war ending. It is the sound of a superpower counting what it has left in the warehouse and not liking the answer. Before we go further, if you want actual tactical context instead of watching sensationalized headlines fly past you, hit subscribe right now. This channel breaks down how global power actually moves. Notifications on. You are going to want to be here when the next phase of this thing starts, because based on what senior officers are telling reporters this week, it is coming. Here is the frame nobody in the mainstream coverage is drawing sharply enough. This is not a story about Iran outlasting American resolve. Iran did not win anything. This is a story about a Patriot interceptor that costs $4 million being fired at a Shade 136 drone built for $20,000 of Chinese electronics, a moped engine, and a delta wing of glued composite. Do that math 200 times a night for 13 nights. Then do it again with the Houthis in the Red Sea, and again with the interceptors already shipped to Kyiv over the last 3 years. That is the war, not the flash on the horizon. The empty bunkers in Alabama and Camden, Arkansas. The target list, according to Pentagon sources speaking to reporters, ran past 300 sites. Enrichment halls at Natanz and Fordow. Missile production at Parchin and Sharid. IRGC command bunkers scattered across the Zagros. Air defense nodes from Bandar Abbas up through Bushehr. 13 consecutive nights. Then the hold. The Defense Department source used one specific word to describe it, on a hold. Not concluded, not terminated, not victory, on a hold. That phrasing was chosen with lawyers in the room. A hold implies a clock implies a resumption. A resumption implies that whatever forced this pause is a variable that can be recalculated. The variable is the magazine. Rewind 12 months to understand how the Pentagon walked itself into this box. The 12-day war of last summer ended with something no American president had ever ordered before. A direct kinetic strike on the sovereign nuclear infrastructure of another state. GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrators, 30,000 pounds apiece, dropped from B-2 Spirits, flying from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Refueled 6 times over the Atlantic and the Mediterranean by a chain of KC-46 and KC-135 tankers. The stealth bombers cratered the ventilation shafts at Fordow. The centrifuge halls at Natanz went dark. Iranian state television did not show the footage for 11 days. A ceasefire followed, a memorandum of understanding. 60 days to convert exhaustion into settlement. The window did not hold. Talks meant to open in Geneva collapsed before the delegations landed. By March of this year, American strikes on Natanz had resumed, and Iranian state media confirmed the impacts. Through spring and into early summer, the tempo climbed. Then 4, then nightly. By the middle of July, this stopped being a limited campaign and became something that Pentagon planners quietly started calling a sustained air war. Which brings us to the Friday inside the Situation Room. President Trump was weighing something that dwarfed the ongoing campaign. According to accounts multiple officials gave to reporters at Reuters, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, the option on the table was categorically different. Widening strikes to hit Iran's energy backbone directly, coastal radar arrays along the Persian Gulf, the Bandar Abbas Naval Complex, and most seriously a discussed move on Kharg Island, the terminal that handles roughly 90% of Iranian crude exports, sitting in the eastern Gulf, 25 kilometers off the Iranian coast, a low sandbar with jetties long enough to berth 2 million-barrel tankers. Take that in. Not a strike on a mountain, a strike on the artery. An assault on Kharg is not a punitive raid, it is regime pressure. Cut Kharg for 90 days and Iranian oil exports fall from roughly 1.6 million barrels a day toward zero. That is not escalation in the ordinary sense. That is the opening move of a war designed to break a government through hunger and hard currency starvation. 2 men in that room said no. Vice President J.D. Vance raised political concerns about broader escalation. That is the softer half of the story. The harder half came from General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. According to the officials describing the meeting, Kane did not tell the president the operation was impossible. He told him it was executable. He said the strike could succeed on its own terms. Then he laid out the cost. The cost was not measured in dollars, though the dollars alone are staggering. It was measured in interceptors, specifically the Mime 1 and 4 Patriot family, specifically the PESI 3MSE variant, the hit-to-kill interceptor manufactured by Lockheed Martin at their Camden, Arkansas facility. The one round in the American inventory that can reliably kill a maneuvering ballistic missile in its terminal phase. Here is the number that reframes the entire war. By spring of this year, the Pentagon had already expended more than 1,200 Patriot interceptors in this conflict alone. Each PEC 3MSE round cost the United States government approximately $4.1 million in unit procurement, and closer to $5 million once you factor in the launcher wear and the radar cycles. Do the arithmetic. 1,200 rounds. Roughly $5 billion in defensive munitions burned in one theater, before the most intense stretch of the campaign even began. That figure sits inside a much darker accounting problem. Lockheed Martin's Camden facility produces roughly 550 3 MSE interceptors per year at full surge capacity. Congress has funded an expansion to reach 650 by 2027. The math does not close. Iran alone has consumed more than 2 years of production in 10 months of fighting. Layer on the 300-plus Patriots handed to Ukraine since 2023. Layer on the interceptors burned defending Al Dhafar Air Base, Prince Sultan Air Base, and Ain al-Assad from Houthi and Iranian rocketry. Layer on the standing requirement to keep batteries operational in South Korea, Japan, Poland, Germany, and Guam. The pipeline is empty. Kane was not delivering hesitation. He was delivering an inventory report dressed in 4 stars. He told the commander-in-chief that the United States could win the escalation and afterward find itself unable to defend naval support activity Bahrain if the Iranians decided to empty their remaining Fatah and Khaibar-Shikan missile silos in one salvo. He told him the Aegis destroyers in the 5th Fleet were burning SM-3 Block IOA and SM-6 rounds at a rate the industrial base cannot replace inside 24 months. The SM-3 Block IA costs $28 million per round. The Navy has been firing them at Iranian medium-range ballistic missiles as if they were flares. Ambassador Mike Waltz went on Sunday morning television to soften the message. He did not deny it. He said, in his exact phrasing, that a lot of stockpiles are depleted. He pointed to years of shipments to Ukraine. He pointed to the Yemen drawdown. Then, in the same breath, he said the United States has everything it needs to continue the campaign if the president chooses. Both statements are technically true. Together they are a confession. Now the invisible war, the one the cable news graphics do not show. While the strike packages were airborne over Iran, a much quieter machine was running underneath them. RC-135 return aircraft loitering over the Caspian, hoovering up Iranian air defense emissions. EAG growlers off the USS Gerald R. Ford jamming the S-300 Pu-2 batteries around Isfahan. 2 E-3 Century OSS platforms rotating out of Al Dhafar to keep continuous coverage of Iranian airspace. 14 KC-46 Pegasus tankers running racetracks over Saudi Arabia and the eastern Mediterranean, each hauling roughly 200,000 pounds of JP-8 to keep F-35s and F-15EX on target. Every one of those aircraft burns fuel that has to be trucked, piped, or shipped through terminals that themselves sit within Iranian ballistic missile range. Al-Udeid alone consumes roughly 1.2 million gallons of jet fuel per day at surge tempo. The fuel comes from refineries in Kuwait and the UAE. Those refineries sit inside a narrow blue strip of water that Iran can close in under 6 hours using nothing more sophisticated than mines and small boats. The fuel chain is longer than most people think. Jet fuel destined for Al-Udeid is refined at the Mine Al-Amadi complex in Kuwait, trucked south along Route Tampa, staged at forward depots in eastern Saudi Arabia, then piped or barged across the Gulf under insurance premiums that have quadrupled since March. Every gallon burned by an F-15EX orbiting north of Bushehr represents roughly $42 in delivered cost by the time it reaches the wing tank. A single strike package of 8 aircraft, 4 hours on station, 3 refueling cycles burns close to $180,000 in fuel alone. Multiply that by 13 nights. Then add the tanker fleet's own consumption, which runs at roughly 3 to 1 against the fighters it supports. The satellite analysts in windowless rooms at Fort Belvoir and Beale Air Force Base have been watching something specific for the past 10 days. Not the strike craters. Those were cataloged in the first 72 hours. They are watching the truck traffic outside the Fordow ventilation shafts. They are watching whether Iranian engineers are hauling debris out or hauling replacement centrifuge components in. They are watching the fuel storage yards at Bandar Abbas to see whether the Iranian Navy is dispersing its Kilo-class submarines. They are watching the Zulfiqar missile depots at Kermanshah to see how many transporter-erector launchers survived the last week of strikes. The imagery is coming from a rotating constellation. 2 KH-11 Kennen Electro optical satellites in Sun synchronous orbit. 3 commercial birds from Maxar's Worldview Legion series pulled in under contingency contract. Radar coverage from a Lacrosse 5 platform to see through the cloud cover that has been rolling in from the Zagros. The tasking cycle has compressed from 90 minutes to under 30, which itself burns through the reaction control fuel on the KH-11s at roughly triple the normal rate. Those satellites do not refuel. Every extra maneuver shortens their operational life by weeks. The picture, according to leaked assessments, is ambiguous. That ambiguity is itself a weapon Iran is using effectively. Drop a comment below on how you see this specific standoff unfolding. I read through these, and your takes help shape what we investigate next. Especially if you have technical background on air defense economics or Persian Gulf shipping, I want to hear it. Here is where the story gets uncomfortable for Washington, because Iran did not blunder into this position. Iran engineered it. For 15 years, Iranian strategy has been built around one specific concept: the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force under General Amir Ali Hajizadeh, until his death last summer, designed a doctrine that treated Iranian ballistic missiles not as war winners but as magazine drainers. Fire enough Shavin 36 drones, enough Fatah 1 hypersonics, enough Kabar-shaken medium-range ballistic missiles, and the enemy runs out of interceptors before you run out of launchers, the Shade 136. Iranian designation for a delta-wing loitering munition with a 2-stroke MD-550 engine copy from a German ultralight design. Wingspan 2.5 meters. Warhead between 40 and 90 kilograms depending on variant. Range roughly 2,500 kilometers at a cruise speed of 180 kilometers per hour. Radar cross-section comparable to a large seagull. Unit cost, according to Ukrainian intelligence estimates of captured examples, between $20,000 and $50,000. The interceptor firing at it, the Pay-3 MSE, costs $4.1 million. That ratio is the entire Iranian war plan. It is not brilliant because it is clever. It is brilliant because it is arithmetic that the Pentagon cannot outrun even at full industrial mobilization. Hajizadeh's successors understood something American planners have spent 2 decades avoiding. You do not have to defeat the United States military, you have to outlast its magazines. And the magazines are finite in a way American doctrine has not seriously wargamed since 1991. The Fordow 1 is a different animal. Iranian designation for a solid fuel medium-range ballistic missile with a maneuvering reentry vehicle, unveiled in June of 2023. Range 1,400 kilometers. Terminal speed claimed at Mach 13, over 13 times the speed of sound, though Western intelligence assessments place the realistic figure closer to Mach 8 in terminal phase. What matters is not the top speed. What matters is the maneuver. A ballistic missile on a predictable arc can be intercepted by Pake-3 with roughly a 70% probability of kill. A missile that jinks laterally in its final 30 seconds drops that probability to something closer to 30%, which means the American doctrine has to fire 2 interceptors per incoming round to maintain confidence. 2 Patriots per FATA. $8.2 million in interceptors per incoming missile. Iran has, by best Western estimates, roughly 3,000 ballistic missiles in its inventory. Do the math on what it would cost the United States to defend against a full salvo. The number is larger than the entire annual Pay-3 production budget. The single variable Iran did not account for is the one Kane flagged in that room. The Iranians assumed Washington would exhaust its interceptors before exhausting its political will. What actually happened is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs walked into the Oval Office and told the president that continuing would leave American bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE effectively undefended against a follow on Iranian salvo. That is not a calculation the Iranians factored because they did not expect it to be delivered before their own missile stockpile collapsed. The pause is not Iranian victory. It is a simultaneous exhaustion event that both sides recognized at roughly the same hour. Meanwhile, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Begay held a televised press conference this week and did not sound like a government preparing to negotiate. He stated plainly there are no talks currently underway with the United States. Not pause talks, not preparatory talks, none. He said Iran will never let Washington determine the timing of war and peace on its behalf. He accused France and the United Kingdom of complicity with the aggressor. He said Iran had expected the new British government to act more wisely than the last one. That is not a country riding a face-saving off ramp. That is a country preparing its domestic population for round 2. There is exactly one place where functional diplomacy is happening. Iranian and Omani officials meeting inside Tehran to discuss shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's foreign ministry has been careful to frame these talks as strictly bilateral. A conversation between 2 coastal states about safe passage, explicitly not connected to the United States. Why the careful framing? Because Hormuz is not a shipping lane, it is the artery of the global economy. 21 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Roughly 20 million barrels of crude oil per day pass through it. That is nearly 1/5 of all liquid petroleum consumed on Earth, every single day moving through a channel narrower than most American counties. During the pause, Brent crude fell more than 6%, settling near $90 a barrel. Read that carefully. Prices did not spike during a supposed ceasefire, they fell. That single data point tells you exactly how markets are pricing this thing. They are not pricing peace. They are pricing a temporary exhale. The tanker rates on VLCCs transiting Hormuz have quietly climbed by roughly 35% in war risk premiums over the last 90 days, even as spot crude fell. Insurers at Lloyd's of London are pricing hulls as if Hormuz closes within 6 months. Traders are pricing physical cargoes as if it does not. Both cannot be right. The economic ripple beyond crude is where the picture gets truly disturbing. South Korean and Japanese refiners, which import roughly 70% and 85% of their crude respectively through Hormuz, have quietly drawn down strategic reserves by 12% since March. Indian refiners at Jamnagar have shifted procurement toward Russian Urals grade at discounts that would have been unthinkable 18 months ago. European natural gas prices, still recovering from the Ukraine shock, spiked another 18% on the news of the Saudi refinery hit before settling back down when the strikes paused. Every one of those movements is a signal from the physical economy that the professionals do not believe this pause holds. Zoom out further, because this was never a 2-country war. Houthi forces in Yemen launched an attack that struck a Saudi Aramco fuel refinery inside the kingdom this week. This was the first successful direct hit on Saudi oil infrastructure in 4 years. The last one was the 2019 upquake strike that briefly took 5% of global crude off the market. Patriot battery, operated by a Greek coalition crew, intercepted follow-on Houthi drones and missiles fired at Ras Tanura, the terminal that handles the overwhelming majority of Saudi seaborne crude exports. The Houthi weapon of choice was the Quds 4 land attack cruise missile, an Iranian-derived design with a range of roughly 2,000 kilometers and a radar cross-section small enough to slip through most legacy Saudi air defense coverage. The Patriots caught them. But every Patriot fired at Ras Tanura is a Patriot not available for Al Udeid. The magazine problem is not linear, it is regional. Consider the arithmetic from Riyadh's side. The Royal Saudi Air Defense Forces operate roughly 24 Patriot batteries. Each battery has a typical loadout of 16 to 32 interceptors on ready launchers. Sustained Houthi attack tempo since March has forced Saudi crews to fire an average of 8 interceptors per week to maintain a credible defense of Ras Tanura, Jubail, and the eastern refineries. That is 400 rounds per year. Against a resupply pipeline that Washington controls and is currently rationing, Saudi Arabia is discovering, in real time, that being an American ally in a magazine-constrained war means waiting in line behind American bases. And then the threat nobody expected in a Middle Eastern war. Iran has accused Ukraine of carrying out a long-range strike that killed a sailor aboard an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. President Zelensky has stated publicly that Russia is passing satellite imagery of Gulf states and American military facilities directly to Tehran. Read that sentence twice. Russian military intelligence, the GRU, is feeding Iranian targeting cells the coordinates of Al-Dhafra, Al Udeid, and naval support activity Bahrain. The imagery reportedly comes from the Russian Persona optical reconnaissance satellites, which have a claimed ground resolution of 30 centimeters, enough to count aircraft on a ramp, enough to identify which hangars house F-35s and which house the KC-46 tankers, enough to build a target folder that an Iranian missile battery commander can execute against on 20 minutes' notice. 2 wars, one in the Middle East and one in Eastern Europe, are now bleeding directly into each other. Shared intelligence flowing eastward, retaliatory strikes flowing across the Caspian, weapons supply chains under simultaneous strain on 3 continents. The electronic warfare picture over Iran during the last 13 nights was itself a story most coverage missed. American Growlers running the ALQ-249 next-generation jammer against Iranian S-300 acquisition radars. Iranian counterjamming from ground-based systems that appear to be Chinese-sourced YLC-80 VHF arrays, which were specifically designed to detect low observable aircraft at longer wavelengths than conventional fire control radars. Whether the YLC-80 actually holds an F-35 at useful range is one of the open intelligence questions the analysts at Wright-Patterson have been arguing about for the last 6 months. What is not in dispute is that Iran has deployed at least 4 of them, and their positioning suggests coverage of the approach corridors from the Gulf. So where does this actually go? The honest answer, the one that respects your intelligence, is that nobody, not the sharpest analysts, not the officials inside the White House, not the clerics in Tehran, can tell you which way this tips. But the shape of the danger is visible if you look at it carefully. If the pause was never really about opening a door for peace, and was instead primarily about buying time to rebuild depleted stockpiles, then this quiet has an invisible expiration date built into it. Lockheed Martin is currently accelerating PEC-3 MSE production toward a target of 850 rounds per year, but even under full mobilization, that surge does not arrive until late 2027. Raytheon is running the Standard Missile line at Redstone Arsenal at maximum capacity, but the tantalum and gallium arsenide supply chains for the Seeker heads run through smelters in China and refiners in Kazakhstan that Beijing can throttle at will. The industrial base cannot outproduce the Iranian magazine inside 18 months. That means the pause, whatever the White House calls it publicly, is a rearmament window. And Tehran knows it. The Iranian missile production complexes at Parchin and Semnan are running around the clock. The satellite imagery from Maxar and Planet Labs shows fresh truck traffic at both facilities within the last 72 hours. Iranian centrifuge cascades that the American strikes were supposed to have permanently disabled are showing thermal signatures that intelligence analysts are quietly debating in classified assessments. Every account of the actual nuclear damage has varied wildly depending on who is talking. Some officials describe the destruction as severe and irreversible. Other assessments, including one that leaked from the Defense Intelligence Agency, describe the damage as delaying the program by a matter of months, not years. When the intelligence community cannot agree with itself on how much damage was done, that ambiguity becomes a reason for the next war. You cannot verify a nuclear threat has been eliminated without physically inspecting it. You cannot inspect without cooperation. And a country that has just been bombed for 13 consecutive nights has no incentive to open the doors to inspectors. Destruction on one hand, verification on the other, pulling in opposite directions. No resolution in sight. Here is the truth sitting at the center of all of this. A pause in bombing is not the end of a war. It has never been in any conflict in any era of recorded history. What we are watching is a system under enormous strain, catching its breath before whatever comes next. The United States military, still the most powerful fighting force on Earth, reached a point where its own most senior officer had to stand in front of the commander-in-chief and say plainly, we can carry out this operation, but we may not be able to defend ourselves afterward. That is not weakness. That is responsible power being honest with itself in a room where nobody else is watching. It is also a warning sign. A superpower forced to ration defensive stockpiles in the middle of a war it deliberately chose to escalate is a superpower operating closer to its actual limits than most observers realize. On the other side, a government sitting in Tehran told its own people that no outside power decides when this war ends. That is not the language of a country looking for an exit ramp. That is the language of a country settling it. Between those two positions sits an entire region holding its breath. Oil tankers moving nervously through the narrow blue waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Saudi refineries recovering from a direct hit for the first time in 4 years. PEX-3 interceptors being fired at more than $4 million apiece to protect infrastructure that keeps the global economy moving. And a nuclear question sitting unresolved at the center of it all, one that nobody in Washington, nobody in Tehran, and nobody at the International Atomic Energy Agency can answer with confidence. Wars do not usually end with a single dramatic moment everyone recognizes in real time. They end, or more often they escalate, through a long series of quiet decisions made inside rooms most of us will never see, by men and women weighing stockpiles and casualties and political survival against each other on scales the rest of us never examine. What happened this past Friday inside that White House meeting was one of those decisions. It did not generate the headlines a missile strike would have generated. It may matter more than any single bomb dropped in the last 2 weeks, because it revealed something the watching world needed to see. Even the most powerful military machine on Earth has a measurable limit, and right now, both sides of this standoff are quietly betting the other one hits that limit first. The Iranians are betting Lockheed Martin cannot surge the Camden line fast enough. The Americans are betting the Iranian missile production at Parchin cannot survive another 13 nights of GBU-57 penetrators dropped on the reinforced concrete roofs. Both sides are wrong about the timeline in ways they will not discover until the next salvo is already airborne. The intelligence services in London, Paris, Berlin, and Tel Aviv are running their own timelines against the American one, and they do not match. Israeli assessments, delivered quietly to visiting American officials last week, placed the Iranian breakout capability closer to 90 days than 9 months. British assessments push it out further. The gap between those numbers is not academic. It is the difference between a resumed campaign in October and one that waits until spring. And spring in the Persian Gulf means dust storms, poor visibility, and the exact operational environment that degrades precision weapons in ways the Pentagon does not like to talk about publicly. There is a final piece worth naming. The Chinese have been watching every second of this. Every interceptor expended. Every stockpile figure quietly leaked. Every industrial bottleneck exposed. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force operates roughly 3,300 ballistic and cruise missiles pointed at Taiwan and the American bases across the first island chain. The lesson of the Iran campaign is not lost on Beijing. The magazine equation that just paused an American war in the Persian Gulf is the same equation that governs any future Taiwan Strait scenario. And the numbers, if anything, are worse in the Pacific. Whether the coming resumption in Iran ends in a genuine peace, or in the escalation that was quietly shelved this past week inside that room, will not be answered by press conferences or carefully worded statements. It will be answered by what actually happens the next time the skies over Iran fall silent again. And whether that silence turns out to be the sound of a long war ending, or the quiet, patient sound of both sides reloading for whatever comes next. If you enjoyed this video, check out our other video on the Kharg Island doctrine. Bye for now.